Ready.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the UpSet podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Latasha Hewitt, and we are happy to be back with you on this Sunday. We had a week off last week, and me and my fellow upsetters have missed you. So let's bring the rest of the crew on. Hello,
Hello.
everybody.
Good.
Hello.
Good
Hello.
early
Hello,
evening.
family.
Yes.
What's up?
Hello. Welcome back. And for those of you who normally watch us, you may see an extra box there. We have a special guest joining us this evening, guys. We are so happy to have with us our esteemed colleague, Dr. David Defoe. Welcome, Dr.
Welcome,
David
Doc.
Defoe.
Oh, well,
Glad
thank
you're
you
here.
all for having me. I feel honored.
Yes, yeah, we're honored. We're honored. You know, I think this is the first time we've ever had 7 boxes. Everybody looks great. This is going to be a great dialogue. Now, I don't know. I don't think Dr. Defoe really needs an introduction. I mean, of course, we all know him as our colleague, pastor, and relationship ministries director. However, Dr. Defoe is very skilled in lots of areas. One of them happens to be the subject matter that we're dealing with today. Good grief. Good grief is our title for today, and we've heard that expression over and over, right? We've heard people use it, right, guys? Good grief. All right, but of course, we're talking about it more in a context of grieving, and you know, as a conference, we've kind of been grieving a loss recently.
Kinda.
Yeah.
Right.
Not kind of, but
Right.
intensely been grieving.
Very much so.
And oh yeah. And so we know that beyond that particular grief, people are grieving different things every day, different losses every day, people, experiences, things of that nature. And so the crew, we said, hey, we need to talk about this because this is a process that takes place for people every day, and we need to do it right. We want to make sure we're grieving correctly, if there's such a thing. And so, you know, before we kind of jump into some questions for the good doctor, I kind of want to know, my fellow upsetters, when you guys think about grief, what comes to mind, or what is your first experience, or what's the first time you remember feeling what you consider to be grief?
That's a good question. The
What-
first time.
Yeah, first time, or when you realize, I think I'm grieving here, or
You know, this might be crazy, guys, but I could remember grieving my cat.
I was gonna say it was a pet.
Yeah. I had a black cat, not the one that tears down the screen, guys. But I had a cat, and I think about 6 years old, the cat was missing, and it was like a death. And to me at that point, and I think that's the first time I could actually say around maybe 6 years old, maybe 5, 6 years old, that I've experienced grief.
That had to be catastrophic for you.
Yeah.
Well, I when I experienced related to the same topic with a pet, when I experienced what I know to be grief now, I didn't know it was grief then. I was just brokenhearted, and you know, it wasn't tagged as grief. My family, my friends, no one really used that word. But I know that what I felt was grief.
Yeah, for me, it was a pet also. I was probably about 8 years old, and I'll never forget how angry I was. I didn't realize how upset I was about the loss of my dog, Leo, but later on I realized I was grieving that dog.
Wow. I guess I should have had more pets. I didn't even have any pets growing up.
What, you needed more grief when you were younger? I mean,
I know. I feel like,
Good grief.
And yet,
good grief, right?
I will add that as I, got older and had family members that died, I can tell you that depending on who it was that died, I didn't have as much grief for them as I did for my dog.
Mm.
I know that sounds kind of gruff on the surface, but I've come to realize that grief was relationship based.
Yes.
Mm.
So, and I didn't feel bad about it. It's just that, I was sorry for the death in the family, but it was a family member I rarely related to.
Mm-hmm.
well, for me, it was a family member. I was young. I didn't know what death was, but I know it made my dad cry, and my father was my heart. And when he started crying, I don't know what happened. I just knew I started crying, empathetically, because whatever it was that made him cry, I knew whatever it was going to bother me at some point. And that was the first time I remember just being sad.
For me, I can't quite remember grief as a child. We did have some pets, but I wasn't all pet oriented at the time. So when we lost, there were others grieving, and to me, I was like, okay, they passed. It wasn't so horrible for me. But I can say as a young adult, and even still today, I struggle with grief. I struggle with the pain of loss. And even after grieving last Sunday, because the Fordhams were like family to me, just the very next morning, I get a message that my uncle passed away. He was fine Sunday, no problems, no apparent problems. But he doesn't wake up the next day. So here I am now having to do grief over grief. And so I still struggle. I struggle as an adult. I struggle as a pastor. I go to the scriptures for consolation, and I beg Jesus for the comfort that he's promised, but there is still that deep sorrow. And then my coping strategy, and I tell others, talk about it, make sure you don't hold back. The only way I know how to deal with it, I have to push it out of my mind. Last night, I woke up grieving over my uncle, and it was so heavy. I had to push it to the side and try to, get other things on my mind. So I need the good doctor today to share some techniques and things with me. But my go-to strategy is definitely prayer and the word. That's what has gotten me through. But I know not just myself that I'm going through multiple episodes of grief. I know right now we've got multiple family members passing either at one time or within the same year or a few years.
Yep.
Close together. I just lost my dad last March, and then my stepmom, his second wife in November. Now my uncle, and then all the friends and things in between. So it's just so much multiple grief. It's almost like you can't even recover.
They almost say like it comes in threes or something like that. They always say that. But there's two things before you go, Tally. I see someone in the chat that's grieving their parents' marriage, the loss of their parents' marriage. I said, wow, that's absolutely. And I don't know how Dr. Dave is going to take us through that one, but I don't know if you could help us with this. If you look on Facebook right now, all of the parents who dropped their kids off. Well, I know I've been through it too. Definitely have been through it too. But I'm looking at this big Oakwood renaissance that's going on. And even now, Pastor Marlena, you just dropped off your son at Pine Ford.
We stopped by, but I have to drop him off tomorrow. And
I'm just wondering, is that also a part of grief? Even though they have not died, but the separation or something like that. So I see those two, one with the parents also. I'm ready to hear how this thing is going to roll.
Dr. Defoe, can you help us define what grief is?
Yeah.
Can y'all just call me David? Stop playing around with me. But
all right, Dr. David, can you define what grief is?
I think that you all brought up some very good things. The truth of the matter is, any significant change in any normal pattern of behavior creates grief. So a lot of people think that grief is just death. No, grief is not just death. Grief is significant change, and so we don't just grieve people who we lose through death. We grieve people through divorce. We grieve people through changes. For us as pastors, our kids grieve when they move from one place to the next. You know, can you imagine what some of our children go through when they lose not only school friends but church friends? We grieve the loss of normalcy. For many of us, some of the challenges that we're having with COVID is not just those who we've lost to the disease, but the loss of normalcy, the loss of being able to go and, hang around the water cooler and gossip, to go out to lunch with coworkers, to hug relatives and friends. Those are significant losses. And one thing that we know about loss is it alters and it changes our perception on almost everything. So many people, they think that, they're depressed or they have anxiety when really and truly they're grieving. And so I think that you all have brought up some very good points. And I have sat in grief groups with people, working with people. And I have been in a group with a lady who lost her daughter and a lady who lost her cat. And the lady who lost her daughter processed her grief far better than the lady who processed her cat. And for those of you who all may be saying, well, come on, it's just a cat, right? We don't grieve people. We don't grieve things. We grieve relationships. Mm-hmm. And the strength of those relationships determine the level by which we experience the pain that we feel. Right. And so the truth of the matter is we don't like to compare. We don't compare grief. We don't compare losses. We don't say to someone who's lost someone, you know what? I know what you've been through. We don't. Because even if we grieve the same person, all of us are grieving our president, but we're all grieving him differently because our relationships with him were different. Now, he made everyone feel like they were the most important person in the world. That's just who he was. But we all had a relationship with him that was different. Mine with him was antagonistic. Every time I said something, I would be like, yo, don't fire me, man. I was just playing. But we grieve our relationships. And so that's why sometimes we don't understand why it takes people some time to sort of meander through the period of bereavement. It's because we don't understand that we're grieving the relationship.
There's a word you keep saying, David, and that is loss. Mm-hmm. Is grief always associated with loss?
Well, what do you lose, right? So Tally, to be honest, right? When people get married, right? They're in the state of euphoria. They're having a great time, right? There's always an adjustment period in marriage. But one thing that we discovered is that adjustment period is tied to the fact that I have now lost my individuation. Mm-hmm. I have now moved from being an individual to now being collective. I now got to ask somebody if I could go downstairs to the bathroom, right? Or you know what I mean. So that period of adjustment, that there's a loss there. So even though I'm happy, I've still lost something, right? Yeah. When we move, when we change jobs, when our like someone in the chat said, when our parents divorce, any significant change in any normal pattern of behavior creates loss, and we have to grieve those things. Now, the challenge is once we don't grieve them, it then comes out in negative behavior, right? Mm-hmm. That's where you get the anger and the aggression and the apathy and the abandonment and the abuse, right? That's where all that other stuff comes out because we don't grieve our losses appropriately.
So that brings up the question, what's appropriate? Because some people may think they're grieving the appropriate way, and then some of the things you just shared manifest, and they're like, maybe I wasn't doing it properly. And I know we all do it differently, but just in general, how do we know when we're grieving the right way?
So I want us to, grief is personal, and it's not prescriptive. Right. And so in grief nomenclature, we talk a lot about stages. We talk a lot about, like something like Warden's tasks of mourning. Right. We talk a lot about those things. But one of the challenges that we face is Grief is so personal in that we're grieving a love relationship with someone or something that I can't use someone else's language to describe how I feel. It's their language. So I have to figure out a way to develop my own personal language to describe the miasma of pain that I may be feeling. So I have to find my own language, right? And so when we talk about the right way is your way. Mm-hmm. And as you grieve your way, now wait, we don't want to utilize mechanisms that don't help us sit with pain, right? So one of the things I tell my clients all the time, and they look at me like I'm crazy when I say it at first, what do I do with this pain? They're grieving. And I tell them you have to sit in it, and you have to sit with it. You have to allow the grief to overwhelm you at times. Why? Because if we put it aside, all we're doing is saving it for later. Mm-hmm. Right? And the longer we push it aside, then something else comes. And now we've taken that grief we've put aside and we've compounded it with something else. And we continue to do that over and over again. And then they teach us things like crazy things, like when you lost your cat, they probably just tried to buy you a new one. Right? Yeah. When a kid comes home from school and they're sad, we teach the kid, let's go get something to eat. Let's go get some ice cream to make you feel better. So what we teach people is when you lose something, when you're in pain, replace it. So you move from one relationship to the next, right? You move from one job to the next, right? You're taught to sort of make yourself feel better with food or short-term pleasure. Because you were taught that. And so for many of us, we don't view grief the right way. Another pet peeve, and I'm not going to, crying is an important tool for healing the heart. One cannot, if they don't enter into their emotions, heal their heart. The heart is not healed with what you know. It's not healed with the head. It must be healed with the heart. And in order for the heart to heal, the heart must feel. And if we put aside the feelings, we'll never heal. So we have to get into it, man.
Do we say amen or,
this is really good stuff.
Yeah, I was sitting in it. But
I'm mad only because you weren't around 40 years ago. I mean, David, this is really good stuff.
It is.
So the title of today's program is Good Grief. Could you, is it then healthy to think that grief can be good? Is it ever really a positive experience, David?
Is grief ever a positive experience? I don't know.
Well, thank you for joining us today.
I feel like it's a necessary process, but not necessarily a good one.
Loss is a part of life.
Here's what I'd like you to break down for me, Dave.
I want to hear him work through this thing.
No. I want you to break down the language. You said we have to have our own language. I've heard you talk about that before with anxiety and some other things. I know we've had a private discussion about that, but talk to me, unpack that language thing. It has to be your language. Unpack that.
When someone asks you, how do you feel? And your response is, I don't know. What we're saying, are we really saying, I don't know? Or are we saying is, I don't want to go into myself to see myself because I don't know what I'm going to find and whether I'm going to be able to handle it, right? And many of us, we avoid asking people how they really feel because one thing we don't want to be is triggered with our own stuff, right? I don't want your pain to actuate my pain. So the quickest way for me to avoid my pain is to help you turn off your pain. Right? And so we provide comfort and hope where we should just provide space, right? We try to tell people, no, don't cry when crying is the thing that they need. Why don't we want people to cry? Because it's going to then affect us in our tears that we've put aside, right? And now we're going to enter into your pain and we've tried our hardest to put ours away. And it's going to, like there's an old Russian proverb that says, if you live next to the cemetery, you can't cry at every funeral. We teach people the art of detachment when we really don't work with our issues. We just sort of displace them, put them off, and they come up later. They come up later at unopportune times. Remember when Kobe Bryant died? A whole bunch of brothers were crying, and yes, everyone was sad that Kobe Bryant died. But many of us brothers, we found it now socially acceptable to shed tears in community, and not all of us were grieving the fact that Kobe Bryant died. I'm a Celtic fan. I cried for Kobe. I wasn't crying for Kobe. I'm a Celtic fan. I don't care, no, Lakers. But a lot of us, we're crying because we are now taking things that we have displaced. And now because it's socially acceptable, I can now express my pain that I've been carrying all this time. Well, so when we find the unique language, we have to enter into our pain. We have to understand what it is that we've gone through. We have to take a look at the continuum of our lives and measure all of those points in our lives that it seemed like we have grieved someone, we've lost someone, and then discover for ourselves, well, what was my habit? What was my tendency after all of these losses? Did I just put them away? Did I just try to pick myself up and just carry on? Did I sit down and talk with someone? Once I understand that, then I can start to understand how my innate action to grief, what that actually is. Well, how do I normally respond to pain? And for most of us, if we're telling the honest to God truth, we try to put it away because who wants to be in pain, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not how it heals. That's how we store it, keep it, carry it. And then it comes out in negative behavior. Or like someone else said, self-destructive.
There's a question. Just a second, Charles. There's a question that kind of speaks to what you're saying, David. Val is saying, what would you say about living with grief as opposed to processing grief? Is there a distinction?
Valerie, that's a great question, right? Processing is what we do, but living it, if you have love, you live with it. If the love dies, then the grief dies. But if the love remains, the grief stays. And so we don't get rid of it because we don't get rid of the love. My love for those people that I've lost are still there. So the grief is there because the emptiness and the loss and the disconnect is still there, right? So it's not that we always live with our grief. Now we're not always in the state of bereavement. Mourning, of course, is the process by which we move our lives to adapting to loss. That's how we process grief. We go through the periods of mourning.
Please say that again, David.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy, I don't know what I said.
Mourning is the process where we.
Yeah, okay, so bereavement is the period after a loss, right?
Okay.
It's how we deal with grief in the immediate aftermath. Mourning is the process by which we adapt to the loss of people. Now, mourning does not have a time frame. Time has nothing to do with loss, grief, healing. That idea that time heals wounds, that's a bunch of specialness, okay? Almost was there, man.
I was almost grieving.
You almost. I'll be out of here. Oh man. Yes. So what was I saying now?
That time is not. Time is not
no timetable.
Yeah. There's no timetable on grief. So it's not the time. It's what we do with that time. It's what we do with the space. It's how we sort of grow around our grief, right? How do we develop different coping strategies? How do we develop means to help us emotionally, cognitively, socially, physically, all of those leads? How do we figure out ways to sort of strengthen ourselves and build ourselves so we can build around the pain that we're feeling? We don't get rid of it. It doesn't disappear because the love doesn't go anywhere. So how do we move on? Okay, I don't know.
Wow.
So let me ask you a theological question. So when the Bible says that God will wipe away every tear from our eyes, will God remove the love that we had for people, or?
My question to you, let me answer your question with a question, Tally. Before Jesus came to earth, God and Jesus were one. They were able to always experience true harmony, right?
Okay.
Well, one thing we get is that when Jesus returned back to heaven, he was not the same person when he went back that he was when he left. Does God still mourn the relationship that he had with his son that is now changed to save us?
Oh man, he did that to me. He did one of those things where Jesus says, "Neither will I tell you who gave me the authority to do these things."
The answer is, I don't know, man.
Yeah, that's
and you know
excellent.
I didn't know, so that's why you asked me.
But on the flip side of it, Nick, I also feel that is why the process of change in the last days, or in the last day, that we need to go through that change, so that those things that we mourn. I mean, are we going to mourn sin? Are we going to mourn the things that we love to do that's against God? I mean, this thing about mourning and grieving, it can go to gamut. Right now, I wonder if I still mourn my cat, because every cat that I've had after that first cat are all black cats. So I'm wondering, is that still an extension of my trauma? Do you understand what I'm saying? Or whichever. My son left a black cat here, and he ain't getting that cat back. Because as far as I'm concerned,
It's your cat now.
I'm gonna hold on to his cat. Dave, it's funny. My grandmother passed away July 4th last year, and for some reason, I'm handling it better than Paul, which is my twin brother. Right? You think that we grew up the same. You think that we were in the same, situation. She was our first babysitter, all the way through. But yet, Paul still cries. I think I cried once. Just explain that to me. I mean, why is it that I mourn my grandmother differently than my twin brother mourn my grandmother?
You're different. We grieve relationships.
You said that.
We grieve our relationships.
Said that.
And not all of our presentation of how we grieve can be understood. Some people grieve within themselves. Some people grieve externally. This is why we have to be careful about what we tell people about processes for grief, about what they should experience for grief. Not everybody's going to experience anger. Some people, they have it settled in their mind that loss is a part of life, and I don't necessarily need to be angry about it. I need to be, not everybody bargains with their loss, if we're talking about Kubler's stages of grief or dying. And so we have to realize that grief is personal. It's not prescriptive, that we have to give people the space to mourn and to grieve and experience their periods of bereavement as they see fit. Now, we don't want them to cause harm to themselves. So people who pick up drinking or smoking or pick up excessive shopping or hypersexuality or something like that, we want to help them be able to process their emotions. But for someone who every day goes to visit their mother's graveyard or grave site, you don't got to tell them, mama don't know you there. Bereavement is not for the dead; it's for the living. Right. So, you don't got to tell them that. You don't got to tell them, well, even if and Adventism robs us sometimes of the comfort that we get from some loss. Like some people believe their loved ones are in heaven, man. It would be great if Adventists believed that, because they'll be like, oh, at least, mama's not in the ground rotting. She's up in heaven with Jesus. And, we're robbed of that. But it doesn't matter what's happened to the person that we have lost. It matters what we then do. It matters how we feel. And for many of us, if you give us the option between, like the question that people ask, what can I do for you when they've lost someone, or what can I do? Well, if you really want to do something for me, go raise the dead. Apart from that, that's really what I need right now. So how do you provide space? How do you provide presence for that person? How do you find out the tasks that, if people who are grieving, a lot of people get so involved in the tasks associated with the loss because it helps them distract themselves from the emotions and from the feelings. And that's okay, as long as you remember, if you're trying to help them, those feelings and emotions are going to be there after the conclusionary ritual, after the casseroles are all gone, after the people are all gone. That grief is going to come back rushing like a flood. And oftentimes we're going to leave them alone, and they're not going to have someone there to talk to. Everyone has support when someone just dies. It's after that makes the difference, because that's when people really have to sit in their grief and understand the impact of the fact that, people had filled the house, but now I'm in this house all by myself. Now what do I do? What now? That's when they need us.
Can you give us some signs, David, to look for when we realize, so that we can know if we're becoming unhealthy in our grieving? You made mention of the fact that there's some things that, like if we start drinking too much or something like that, well, not any of us, but if something like that were
you
to
mean
occur.
Any of the others?
Any of the others.
Right. I mean, what are some of the signs that grief is handling us and we're not handling grief?
Well, let's talk about this, Talia. And so I don't want to attack people for maybe behavior, right? But
Okay.
if we're trying to replace our losses, so if we've lost something or someone, and all of a sudden we're trying to replace it because we're trying to, fill the space that person left. If we are engaging in destructive behavior that we didn't engage in prior. Now, or if we engaged in it prior, we're engaging in it more. Those are warning signs, right? But the key is not to let people know, listen, you're engaging in destructive behavior. It's to help them process their emotions and help them process the fact that your negative behavior is tied to your desire to relieve the pain that you're feeling. And to tell the truth, the more you try to relieve your pain, the more the pain sits with you, because it comes back when you've dullen your senses. It comes back when you come back to earth. You know this, Tally. When you come back to earth, they're still there. It's still present with you. And so, letting people know that there are normal, natural reactions to grief, the numbness and the sadness, the tears, the sobbing, the low self-esteem, the feeling low self-confidence, the guilt associated with it, the lack of hope or the feeling of powerlessness. All these things are parts of the natural, normal grieving experience. But we want to make sure we give people the space to express first how they feel before we attack their behavior, right? Gotcha. It's not what people do, it's why they're doing it that makes the difference, right? That's what we have to understand. The what, we can always be judgmental with the what.
I have a few comments. Here's one. Sometimes it's best to say nothing and just be there if they want you there.
But saying, because you don't want to, so yes, you don't want to say the wrong thing, but you also don't want the person to feel, dude, is he even listening? So saying, man, I don't know what to say,
Right.
but I'm going to just be here with you, or something like that. At least acknowledging you don't know what to say, because you don't know what to say. What are you going to do? Like, someone has lost someone. What can you say? Like, what is there to say? God is coming back. He's in right. Yeah, I don't. Okay. Well, you've been saying, okay, well, what's that going to do to help me right now? Yes, I know God is coming back. You don't heal the heart with what you know. So stop talking to people's head when they lose people. Talk to their heart.
Yeah, we just lost the acknowledged master in doing that. One, Henry J. Fordham.
Yeah. Yeah.
Charles, you were trying to ask a question earlier. Did you still have it?
Yeah, in the context of the title of the program, Good Grief. First of all, is there such a thing? And if there is, can we characterize good grief as a way of, or a mechanism to get us to either coping or bringing closure?
I struggle with the word closure. Coping, yes. Closure, I struggle with the word closure. Now, what do we close? We have to close. Let's talk about death of losing people. We do have to close our physical relationship with people. We do have to close that. But our emotional relationship continues. Right? I still am struck by the memory of people. I still remember the smell of you, the sight of you, the look of you, the feel of you, the taste of you, even sometimes, right? So I remember that. Well, I have to figure out a way to move beyond the loss that I feel and beyond the pain that I feel, understanding that I'm always going to be, or I'll more than likely be, triggered by a remembrance of you. The remembrance of you is not something that I want to put away. Right? Yeah. If that answered your question, I don't know if it did.
Well, I was just wondering, because some people are looking for a formula. It's like, oh, if I do this, then this will happen. Yeah. And when we talk about good grief, if we characterize it in so many ways, you could define that. Maybe healthy grief, if there is such a thing. I would think that it would get you from one point to another, and that's why I brought up the two words, closure and coping. Coping is not necessarily agreeing with anything. It is adjusting to a reality that you may or may not agree with. And so in the coping, right, correct. So I was just wondering, in the context of good grief, is there a good outcome? Is there a good result? Is there a good tactic in order to get you through the heartbreak and the memory? Well, memories will always be there, Because I know that some people are just looking for, okay, what button do I push? What do I do?
Mhm.
All right, I've been doing this for
Yeah.
4 months. You know, I got to get to a point where I got to, like, hey, life move,
Like you're
goes
tired of
on.
crying, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's beyond life going on. It's life has to be reshaped, reformed, reorganized, reinvented. Even when we lose things, the lives of as we've known them are over. We have to invent something new. And so, looking at good grief, and looking at what good grief looks like, it's building a life that, yes, celebrates the legacy of those people or individuals that meant something to me, but it's also figuring out how I can exercise my daily routine and do it appropriately. How can I not get overly involved with the emotional responses to my pain so that I'm interrupted in my ability to live life, to learn, to love. It doesn't infect my interpersonal relationships. There's no end point to say someone has moved beyond this. It's personal. It's for us to decide. Can I say to you that when you look at pictures of your loved ones, you won't be overly triggered by them? No. But being overly triggered by them, is that a bad thing? Well, it's a bad thing if you can't function, but is it a bad thing if you can function? No.
Look,
Yeah, go on.
let me ask, in a situation where a family, well, two things, and they're related, but they're separate in a sense. You hear of families in war-torn and distressed areas who will lose up to 5, 6, 7 family members at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And they're alive and they feel like, well, everybody else is gone. Why am I still here? Does that affect the grieving process? And number two, an individual who is a member of your family or someone you're close with, or close in terms of knowing them or relating to them, and they were a negative issue in your life, and you lose them. Can a person feel like they have to grieve? And when they don't grieve, do they feel like, well, I'm heartless or whatever?
Mm.
But if the relationship was of such that it was negative, the grief actually turns into relief because that negative entity is no longer in their lives.
Wow.
That's a good one.
Reminds me of that old song.
that
That old song, I'll be glad when you're dead, you rascal you. Remember that one?
That was before us. I don't know what you're talking.
Yeah, y'all old. Y'all old.
My friend Marlene. My friend.
Yeah.
So we do have to have a distinction between trauma and grief, right? We deal with trauma. Oh, and there, yeah. So
There it is.
Charlotte had mentioned it. We deal with trauma sort of differently than we deal with grief. Trauma is uniquely different than grief and loss. However, someone who has been traumatized by the death of someone, like seeing someone murdered or shot or killed, losing 5 people in war, right? You suffer grief and you suffer trauma. And more than likely, we have to deal with the trauma before we can deal with the grief, right? But to answer the second part of what you mentioned is, remember, we grieve relationships, and those relationships that we grieve are not just positive, they also are negative. So I grieve the fact that you were here and you're no longer here. And I also grieve the fact that you were never here and you're still no longer here. Right. So I have to figure out a way. So even if I've lost someone that I can't stand, right, I still experience some grief. I may be okay with their physical presence not still being around, especially if they've caused me pain. I now feel safer because they can no longer hurt me, right? But I also I'm also going to grieve my fear response. Now, I'm not going to grieve it the same way that I would grieve if someone it makes me happy, but still, I have to put back my whole life. I've dealt with a relationship without my father, and now he's dead, and so now I have to put aside the hope that one day we could reconcile, because now that's no longer possible. Right. And so I want you to understand the reason we don't compare losses is because it may seem to be something small to you, but to someone else, it may be large. Someone may have been hoping all their life that, I would get a phone call, that he'd stop by, that would be able to, navigate a new relationship. And now he's gone. I'm not grieving his presence. I'm grieving his continued absence. Because now I've lost the hope that will change, right? And so, like someone was in my office the other day, and they're talking about, the loss of a child is the toughest loss that you've ever experienced. And I would tell them, I've never lost a child, and God, I pray I never do, right? But I was telling them, you can't make that assumption. Because you don't know. Even if you've lost a child, you can't say to someone who's lost, this is going to sound wrong, lost a dog that was everything to them, that the loss of your child is to a deeper degree, because we lose relationships. You may have had, never mind, I'm not going to go there. But you may have had more children. This person may have lost everything. When this, we just don't know. We have to see people as individuals, and most importantly, not compare losses, and never, ever make the mistake of telling someone who's grieving that you know how they feel. You do not.
Yes.
You do not.
You said a very good point, Dave. Never compare losses. I think that's very important. I want to go to a point that has been said about grieving and mourning, and as adults, right, there's no time frame, and it affects the behavior, and sometimes people act out and they don't know that it's a part of grief. How do we deal with that with our children when they have gone through multiple grief episodes just like us, right? And children may not be able to verbally say how they feel, what's really going on with them, and so then they start to act out. How do us parents deal with that?
So if I'm in pain, right, and I don't have the emotional language, emotional strength, or even the emotional space to express the fact that I'm in pain, if I can't cry out what I feel, I'm going to act it out instead, right? And so just like, you don't attach someone's behavior to who they are, we have to be very careful, especially when we know our children. And, our children are going through some things that we can't even imagine, right? 50% of all anxiety disorders are diagnosed before the age of 14.
Wow.
75 before the age of 24. So our children experience huge levels of anxiety, fear, all of these things. So the most important thing we can do for our child is to make sure we create a space where they can talk to us, where they know that they can come and they can, empty out their emotions, how they feel. And then we have to also provide the environment for them to be able to explore those emotional responses and those pain that they feel, in safe spaces. We have to allow them to see their school therapist, or to go and talk to, a youth leader, where they can feel like they can express the pain that they feel. And then sometimes as parents, we're the source of our children's challenges, right? And it's not just because we created that environment. For some of us, our children have challenges because they have us in them. And we have to be cognizant of that. You can't discipline you out of your child.
That's another show. Let's move on, please.
Sorry. but anyway, so just making sure you create the space.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, I wanted to ask you, because you're talking about like losing an individual, but we also earlier talked about even a divorce or something of that nature, experiencing grief over that. And I've seen situations, since we're talking about children, where a spouse, they divorce and one spouse remarries, and the child may still be grieving the loss of that you know, that couple, that parental, that union of parents in one household, and one parent remarries, and there's anger there because I'm assuming it's because you know, I'm still grieving that you guys are apart and it seems like you're moving on. It's almost like you're disrespecting my grief. How do we deal with situations like that? And am I right in my assessment that that may be where some of the anger is coming from?
Some of the anger, and then also children don't understand the complexity of adult relationships. And so the only constant or the only thing that they can come up with is that it was their fault. We think that children can't hear the truth about certain things because, I don't know why we don't think that. Children know more than we know. We just don't think that that they know. There's sometimes we need to have conversations with them that we may think are adult-like, but if you don't give me a narrative, I'm going to develop my own. Ooh. And my own is always going to be attached to what I did. So many of them, they express anger because they feel guilty. But here's one other thing, right, Latasha, as we talk about children, right? I sat with someone one time that was talking to me about the fact that they couldn't develop meaningful relationships with women, right? And they had a father that left the house early in their life. And their mother told them that the father was on vacation and the father never came back.
Wow.
This guy, his whole life grew up thinking that the reason he couldn't develop attachment with women was because of the father or the man that left his life and was not in his life. When really we discovered through some EMDR stuff that really it was when he was told that his father was on vacation, he lost trust in his mother. So it wasn't the parent that wasn't there. The parent that wasn't there didn't matter to him. Relationships. Wow. It was the parent that was there. Right. And so this is the important thing about making sure that we really take a bird's eye view of the things that we go through, man. And we sit down with people who can sort of help us and walk us through these, or even do it ourselves. Journaling is a good thing that that people can do, even if it's not, just sitting down and just writing out all your thoughts and all that. You can get journals with question prompts. I swear there's a grief journal out there with question prompts, and if not, don't steal my idea. Maybe one day I'll write one, right? Because to write a journal seems pretty easy. But anyway, so getting question prompts where you just sit down and you just respond to questions as it relates to the pain that you're going through. But for Marlena, Latasha, what you all asked, we have to be able to talk to our children and create the space for them for us to understand that, one, they're more complex than we understand, that they think more and process more, especially now, than we ever have before. And then if your children are also cutting, right, or engaging in self-harm behavior, that is a scream, not for attention, but that is it may be sometimes, but that is them screaming out that there is something in them, some pain they're going through, some frustration they're going through, that they're getting some cathartic release by causing themselves physical pain, because to deal with physical pain is easier than emotional pain.
That's right.
All right. I'm off
Profound.
that.
That's
Wow.
profound, David.
Wow.
Good, real talk there.
Go ahead, Charles.
Does grief end? And consequently, what if grief never happens or never begins after a loss on whatever level?
Well, grief is the change in behavior, the change in any significant behavior. So we grieve. Now, we don't always have a period of bereavement, and we don't always mourn, right? But when we experience loss or change, we do grieve, even if we're able to put it aside. Remember, we grieve relationships. So if it's something small, it's not going to cause us much pain, or it's not going to rise to the level of us being so emotionally involved. It's relationship, it's connection, it's what did it mean to me, right? So a lot of people grieve negatively because they had relationships with things that were negative that are now gone. Right. So if I have a negative relationship with my security and my money, if you take my money from me, I'm going to lose my mind because I had a relationship with money. Right. Okay. So I don't know what the question was now because I don't remember.
It was a really good answer, though.
Well, I guess I asked the question because even in my own life, and I've know in the lives of others that have lost things or people or situations, and they no longer grieve. They have no grief whatsoever. It doesn't even come to mind. Even if you try to remind them, it's like Teflon, just rolls right off.
Wow.
And
Is that a
it's-
coping strategy?
Sure, but we can't tell someone that they're deflecting or that they're ignoring it. Maybe perhaps they have built enough security around their grief that it has now become, because they have grown, the grief is now smaller or not as large. It is possible. We don't compare losses. We don't compare reactions to losses, right? There's some people that do not want to discuss their emotional responses to some of the things that they're going through. They just want to keep it to themselves, and that's perfectly fine. But one thing we want to make sure people don't do is we want to make sure that they didn't develop some maladaptive coping strategy of grieving by themselves. In that they felt like they couldn't cry with other people, so they had to go to their room and cry. That they had to be strong and not express their emotions, so they had to hide them. So if you put them away purposefully because it helps you, is different than you developing or you just doing what has always become normal to you and you're just putting it aside. And then one day someone comes and they ask you to open it up, and all of a sudden all this stuff that you thought you were dealing with on your own personal level just blows out all at once.
Hey guys,
Is there?
go ahead.
Is there I just want to ask this one.
No,
last
go ahead.
question.
Go ahead.
And I'm basing it on conversations I've had with people, thought patterns of my own. And for instance, a situation where a spouse loses their mate, husband, wife, and within 6 months they remarry. There have been people who have said, "Wow, boy, that was a short mourning period," because they jump right out and have another relationship. What's to be made of that? Because people get judged.
True.
Well, it was only 6 months. You lost your wife and now you're married again. What's up with that? It's like, are you supposed to not get married again? Or if you do get married shortly after losing a spouse, what does that say? Does that say anything?
Chuck, it could be 3 years. They'll still say it's too short. Or it could be 5 years. They'd be like, man, the body ain't even cold yet. And you get married.
Right. Yeah. But folk are judged by those. They're judged by that,
And incorrectly, because we don't know. We don't know why someone does what maybe they want to experience love, connection, relationships, Maybe they want to have sex. I don't know. Maybe there could be all kinds of reasons.
Well,
and not go to hell
Nick,
for it. I don't know.
Nick, do me a favor.
Yes.
Just in this show, okay? Just keep it.
What I love about David is it's coming right down Broad Street.
Yeah, right.
Right.
You don't have to worry about him hiding a point. You're a preacher. Handle this passage of scripture as we prepare to close. Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 19, one of my favorite passages whenever I'm contemplating having to do a funeral. Jeremiah cries out, "Woe is me for my hurt. My wound is grievous, but I said, truly this is a grief and I must bear it."
Is that for me?
Yeah, man.
I'm a therapist, man. Come on. No, okay.
Whoa, truly this is a grief and I must bear it.
Yeah. We have to see we have to experience and see our losses and see our pain, right? We don't deal with pain by putting it aside. We deal with pain by entering it, by allowing it to instruct us, by allowing us, because the only way through this is beyond this is through this. So we have to sit with our grief, right? We have to experience the pain. We have to experience the range of emotions that come with it, and be honest with ourselves as we're going through those emotions, right? I can't just ignore it. I can't just say, well, you know what, I got to pick myself up and I just got to put my shoulder pad on, be strong, whatever. It's going to come back. It's going to come out.
Hey, guys, I have a question, and I know that we're coming down to an end here, and I know that this is vast. You can go from one end to the other. But Dave, this show today, this podcast came out of one of our immediate losses. Let's just, it wasn't my cat. Okay, it wasn't a loss of our jobs or anything of that nature. So I really want to narrow it down as we're coming down to a close, because we kind of opened it up all over the place. Sometimes even as a pastor, and we have those 10, 15 minutes that we do the eulogy, we say some dumb things. You have talked about some things we should not say. Is there anything you could tell us that we could say?
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about pastors, I'm talking about all of us along. Let's put Sean in a seat. Let's put Joey in the seat. Let's put Donovan in the seat. What good grief. What, I text back. Sean called me. Sean called me. I text him back, and I was sorry I text what I text. I was like, anything you need, let me know. It's like, no, Pat, that was so dumb. Why did you say that? You know what I mean?
It's okay.
What do we say?
Just let me know how I can help. So, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to help. But if you can think of anything, let me know.
Wow.
Right? I can't imagine the pain that you're going through right now. I'm here if you want to talk. Right? Tell me, how's this process going? How are you doing?
Well said, Dave.
Wow.
I just
thanks,
called
Dave.
to check on you.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, that does help. And I know that
Yeah.
we keep all saying we're coming to a close, and I did have, losing the Fordhams the way we did so suddenly, it made me think about when I lost my grandmother, and that was my first experience with grief. I was a teenager, and I literally had spoken to her that Saturday, and Sunday she was gone. She wasn't sick, she just passed away. And grieving so suddenly like that it seemed traumatic to me, and I felt triggered when this happened, because once again I felt caught off guard. And so it made me think, should I prepare for grief? Is that, since it's going to be part of life, is there some way that I can buoy myself up so that
good
when it
question.
happens, it doesn't rock me the way that it does? And that's my final question for you. Is there a way to kind of fortify yourself for something that is going to come eventually, because it's just part of life?
There's a way to prepare for all of life's exigencies, right? We prepare for them by developing the healthy coping strategies to always approach life with honesty, to always live life with routine, to always, eating a healthy diet, exercising regularly, controlling our negative thoughts, right? Accepting our humanity, all these things, being honest with yourself about how you feel. Engaging in self-soothing activities on a daily basis that help you sort of become present in the moment, be mindful of the moment, not working so hard that you miss all of life, or life passes you by, not taking vacations, all these things, man. Fighting the urge to sort of do things by yourself, finding a way to, have an outlet to express your pain, your frustrations. If you do that on a daily basis, when something comes and smacks you in the face, death, accident, anything happens, you already have a built-in coping structure that you can then access. It's always easier if I've already developed it to access it than it is to develop something new while I'm in this circle of pain. Right? So it's making sure that we develop the strategies that we know, what are the things that I like to do that make me happy, and let me do them. How can I reframe in my mind the pain that I go through, the problems, the frustrations that I go through at work, at church, at home? How do I reframe that so that no matter what happens around me, I control how I am no matter what happens around me, right? Developing that sort of resiliency helps us when we deal with things that we don't anticipate.
It's beautiful.
And it's hard. It's hard. But
I characterize that as accepting uncertainty. I mean, if we live our lives understanding that anything can happen, prepare your mind for uncertainty.
But I actually heard a little more than that, and that is to put healthy elements in your life, to structure them in before the emergency demands them. And
Right.
David, I got to tell you, it is. Look, I love you, you know that, but man, I so deeply appreciate the resource that you are, that you represent, and you're sharing it with us today.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you used that word resource, because that's a nice. Oh, did you want to say something?
There was one comment in the chat that I wanted to just address about the word about developing, right? Which Charlotte just said, right? No, we're not prepared, or none of us were prepared. And when we talk about developing a structure, it's living life with normal things that we can utilize and access in times of pain, so that when something like that hits me, I know that this is time for me to go outside and take my daily walk. And because it's habit, I go out and do it. No, it's not going to put aside the pain that I feel, but it's going to help you access the innate resources that you've already developed. Yeah. So developing sort of a self-care routine, and then accessing it when I'm feeling down, when I'm feeling depressed, when I feel like things are falling apart around me. So I'm not saying we develop it in those moments, but we develop a habit, and then we utilize those habits to help us heal our pain. The pain is still going to be there, right? But it helps us not feel like we don't know what to do. So when we don't know what to do, we do what we always do. And it's not what we feel, it's what we have developed a habit for. And those habits will help us.
A healthy habit too.
Yeah, healthy habits, yeah. I hope that made that cleared that up. I'm sorry if that was
Definitely cleared it up.
It did for me.
Yeah, that was great. I was mentioning the fact, Dr. Defoe is a great resource, and he's also provided some great resources, additional resources.
Did he give them to us free like they do on Ellen?
Yeah, they on that website, Marlene. They on that website.
Yes, I love that. So we do have a page on our website that our Relationship Ministries department has put together. Is resources for loss and grief. That website web address is visitaec.org/grief. And on this page, there are Dave, you want to tell them some of the things that they can find there? And I can try to scroll there.
Yeah, there's grief resources for children, for adults. There's grief resources for churches. If you're a church leader and you want to help individuals navigate grief, there's resources on there for pastors. There's resources on there for mental health services. There's an amalgamation of resources on there for you to utilize as it relates to grief and coping. There's also some systematic structures that are linked there for dealing specifically with grief, like the Grief Recovery Institute. There's Grief Share, there's Divorce Care. All those links are there on that particular page of the website.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't scroll it.
Excellent, Dave.
It is.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So make sure you guys check out that page. We appreciate all of you, all the comments. We didn't get to share all of them, but we appreciate the interaction on Facebook and YouTube. And many commented how they were happy to have some tools that they can use for themselves personally, but also for others they know who are experiencing grief. And that's really why we wanted to do this, so we can equip ourselves with the tools that we need, but also know how to be there for others who are experiencing grief. And so thank you so much, Dr. Defoe, for joining
Thank you,
us.
David.
Thank you.
Excellent, man.
You have done a phenomenal job with such a difficult topic. It's, it varies from individual to individual, but I think you've given us all something that we can.
Real quick, gang, did you hear? I don't know if it's in my background. Did you hear baby crying in the background?
I did.
Listen, I'm still grieving sleep. Y'all pray for me.
That's a real thing. But we're happy to be back with you guys next week. Sometimes we change things up. We actually, just for full transparency, we had recorded a couple of episodes that we had ready to go, and then tragedy struck, and so we changed course, but those topics were things that viewers had shared with us that they wanted us to talk about. So in the next coming weeks, we'll be sharing some interesting topics. I think one of them was about executive committee. What is the executive committee? We keep hearing this XCOM executive committee. What is that? What is its function? And so next week, you'll get to hear us.
Why are you smiling like that? I mean, what's the problem with
You're Tally.
I should have said you and Tally. No,
Tasha dumped it over on me, didn't she?
No, I do think that some of those, some of the ones that we recorded before was great. I see that we didn't want to put them out. Let's just let them know. And like you said, in full transparency, it wouldn't have seemed something that we would put out during the time of this, but it was interesting. Oh, yeah. I can't wait to watch it because I can't even remember all the bad things Tally said about.
Well,
it's hard. It's hard being.
Well, this show prepared us for those next.
For the ones.
People are going to be grieving after they see it.
Yeah. So we hope you'll enjoy us again next Sunday for that episode, and we love to hear your feedback on that discussion and know what you think about some of the things that we raised. But for now, once again, thank you for tuning in to the UpSet podcast. Once again, thank you so much, Dr. Defoe, for joining us.
Is there a number they can call in? Is there a number where they could call us if they
disagree with us? You mean you're talking about where they could write us like they've been writing us all along?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we don't have a number, but we do have an email address.
Email address, yeah.
The infamous UpSet at AAC.
I wish you didn't put that up there because people keep writing it, talking about how much they like Tally and they don't like.
No, it's GP that they like. Yeah.
but yes,
awesome.
So look forward to that next Sunday, and as always, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate all of your support and all of your feedback. All right, guys, have a great week. Thanks again, Dr. Defoe. And we're out.
Thanks, David.
Yep.
Bye, guys. See you next time.
What a cute little baby.
Good night.
Yeah.